Greetings, comrades. Have you ever wondered what was it like to live in the workers' paradise? What was it like to stand in line for 3 hours to buy 200 grams of sausages while your government spent enormous resources to monitor its citizens and even more resources to build nukes that would be aimed at the West? Ever wondered how things happened on the other side of the Iron Curtain? Well, you're in luck, as I'm Kristaps Andrejsons of the Eastern Border podcast, where we explain just that. The history of and the life in the Soviet Union, from the perspective of the common man. Using my journalism skills, I combine the historical sources with the tales of the people and add a dash of the ever-present gallows humor to give you all of this and more. Look for the Eastern Border podcast on theeasternborder.lv, iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting app. But for now, enjoy this wonderful Dark Myths podcast. And remember, happiness is mandatory. See you on the other side of the Iron Curtain.
Mr. President, I'm here! I voted for you! Wait a minute. That guy on the grassy knoll's got a gun! He's gonna shoot the president! Holy smokes, I've gotta do something! All right, Lee, time to become an American hero.
Darkmyths.org and Neopolis Media Group proudly present to you the Lone Gunman Podcast, featuring your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths come to die. Stay tuned. Be right there.
It looks that way. Wow. He was always rather vague about the specifics, but a policeman that I interviewed, in fact, the guy who arrested him, Jim Bundren in El Paso, remembered before the assassination, about 3 weeks beforehand, sitting with Nagel in a courtroom as he was about to be indicted, and he ended up being sent off to prison, convicted, actually, of attempted bank robbery, which was total bullshit. But anyway, he remembered Nagel saying to him, well, I'll tell you this. I'm just glad I'm not in Dallas right now.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. How did he kind of fit into the assassination, like into the web of conspiracy? How did he, what part did he play in all of that?
It's a long, somewhat complicated story, but he had been a highly decorated soldier in the Korean War. He'd gone into military intelligence afterward. Been in Japan when Oswald was there in the late 50s and gotten an assignment from the CIA to keep tabs on him. Oswald then went off to the Soviet Union as a defector, or more likely a false defector, in some kind of military intelligence program. And then when he came back to Texas 2.5 years later, Oswald, that is, Nagel was assigned again, initially by the Russians, to keep an eye on him, to see what he might be up to in Texas. Nagel was a double agent for the Russians and the CIA. In other words, the CIA put him to work as a seeming Russian agent. And it was in that context that he uncovered not only one, but two other earlier plots to assassinate President Kennedy that involved anti-Castro Cuban exiles. And eventually Nagel was ordered by the Soviet intelligence agency to either convince Oswald he was being set up on this deal as the guy who was going to take the fall, or kill him in Mexico City. And rather than do that, Nagel did try to convince Oswald, failed to do so, and then got himself taken out of the picture by walking into that bank.
What is up, good peoples? This is your boy Rob Clark. First off, I'd like to apologize for the little 2-month break here. I've been doing this podcast for almost 2.5 years now on a weekly basis without a break, and I desperately needed one. Had a lot of stuff going on, some health issues, all is good now. Your boy is back. And the voice you just heard is that of Dick Russell, Dick Russell, speaking about his epic 800-plus page tome, The Man Who Knew Too Much, referring, of course, to Richard Case Nagel and his story. Today, we're going to take a look at what the actual documents in the official record tell us about Richard Case Nagel, not a story. Now, when it comes to Richard Case Nagel's story, it's a fascinating one, and we're going to touch on many aspects of it here today, not just the documents. And it leaves some unanswered questions, all of which are fascinating, and if true, paint us a very interesting picture of the way things went down. But without further ado, let's get right into it. And I got a special plea for everybody at the end of the show, me and Carmine do. So make sure you listen to the whole show now, because we're going to need your help with something if anybody out there knows anything about this certain piece of evidence. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And here is
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast, and I am your host, Rob Clark. Today, I got a great show for you. Carmine Savastano, the author of Two Princes and a King, and the proprietor of Neapolis Media Group, and also a featured speaker at this year's 2016 NID Lancer Conference. Joins me to talk about Richard Case Nagel. How you doing, Carmine?
I'm doing good, Rob. How are you?
Doing good. I've been gone for a while, but I'm back, and hopefully back on track. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. No, it's good to have you back, man. It's been a while.
Yeah. You know, sometimes you got to take a little breaky break. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes life just gets you by the gonads every once in a while, and it gets a little squeeze. You know.
A call to action, so to speak.
Yes, that's it. But anyway, I'm back, you're back, and it's great to have you back on the show. I miss hearing your voice, and man, I wanted to talk to you about Richard Case Nagel because, you know, like most things, you know, researching the JFK assassination is almost like a cyclical thing. You know, something keeps popping up, and you keep knocking it down. It keeps popping up, and you keep knocking it down. And some things are easy to knock down, and some things aren't so easy to knock down. And some things are still, after all these years, you know, still a mystery. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about this guy, Richard Case Nagel, is because he's intrigued me the whole time, while his entire story is not quite clear to everyone. You know, most people know, okay, this is a guy who walked into a bank in El Paso, Texas, in September of 1963, fired a couple shots into the ceiling of a bank, and then sat on the curb and waited for the cops to come arrest him. Everybody knows this story. You know, and allegedly he had photocopies of Oswald's Selective Service identification on him, or Alec Heidel's or Selective Service identification. He had CIA names in a notebook, and I'm not sure if he initially stated the reason for him doing this, you know, inside the bank, but, you know, later on he would claim that he did it so he would be in jail at the time of the Kennedy assassination, so he couldn't be caught up in all this mess. And that, you know, he allegedly wrote a letter to Hoover under a alias, I believe it was earlier in September, informing him that, you know, there was going to be an assassination attempt on President Kennedy. Let's start with Richard Case Nagel from the beginning, and we'll get to the bank part. We'll get to the other parts, but let's start a little bit back about who Richard Case Nagel actually is, and a little bit more about him.
Okay. Well, we'll start with Nagel joined the U.S. Army in 1948, and he is the sole survivor of a plane crash that left him facially disfigured with psychological problems. It was a really horrible crash, and everyone else died except for Nagel. A year later, Nagel graduated from the U.S. Army Intelligence School in Maryland, and he served in Korea and was a member of the Army's Counterintelligence Corps in Japan. So, though he had, basically as time went on, some of his mental issues would get worse, but he was lucid enough for most of the time that he was entered into the Army Intelligence Corps. So he was being trained, and he was advancing. In 1958, the counterintelligence service ends because of, according to the file, mental instability, and all of his clearances were revoked.
Now, was Nagel, was his name an alias? Did you run across anything about that?
No, that's his name. Other people might have used the name. But Richard Case Nagel is what is in all the files.
Okay.
Now, he's honorably discharged, which I think, people from, how we know about Oswald's dishonorable discharge.
Right.
Nagel's honorably discharged because I think they realized it was beyond his control what was going on. That Nagel wasn't intentionally acting, unstable. It was just his mental, that whatever damage, concussive damage his brain had suffered was making him act strangely.
Yeah, well, he had an outstanding service record before that.
Yeah, he was highly honored, and he was an intelligent, at least the beginnings of an intelligence career. And then that all basically goes awry. So he's discharged from the Army in 1959. The California State Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control employs Nagel as an investigator later in 1959. Now, he does that all right for a couple years. And then in the summer of 1962, he's suspended and dismissed by the Alcoholic Beverage Control Department. Now, this puts Nagel in a bad position because that was basically his only source of income. And he then gets into kind of a legal battle with the Alcoholic Beverage Control Department and starts arguing with officials that he should be paid for back pay that he actually should have gotten. And so while he's trying to earn money and unemployed, a month later, Nagel gets shot in the chest while setting up a meet for possible criminal purposes.
Okay. Now, was he at this time married already?
Yes. Nagel got married earlier, and his wife from Japan had the kids.
Oh, okay.
And then she eventually denied him seeing the kids as his mental state got worse.
Gotcha.
So the strange thing about the shooting is that Nagel would not identify his assailants or furnish any information to officials, but he later files a civil rights complaint against the police for not doing anything about it.
Yeah, well, you don't snitches get stitches, so.
Exactly. It just makes no sense that he would. I mean, you're going to keep quiet, I understand why, but it's like then he files a civil rights complaint against the police. Well, what are they going to do if you won't identify anybody?
True. I mean, they should have done their own investigation instead of relying on his information solo, but, I mean, yeah, if they just chose not to follow up or do a proper investigation even without his cooperation, then he may have been justified in that,
Yeah, it's definitely murky, and unfortunately, as we're going to see in some of the other documents, Nagel's story isn't always consistent.
Right.
So he later withdraws his request for a hearing to receive his retirement contributions from the Alcoholic Beverage Control Department, and they eventually do give him a payout. August 17th, 1962, Nagel's issued a tourist card at Los Angeles, and he subsequently enters Mexico August 24th, 1962. This is where you'll start to see what I think drew people to make, there are similarities between, he and Oswald definitely aren't copies of each other, and they definitely didn't do the exact same things. But Nagel's strange behavior is reminiscent of Oswald's later behavior, which is what I think had some people think that they were definitely connected.
Yeah, well, just the whole. I know Nagel had a longer time in the service, but I believe he was discharged in, I think, October of '59, which roughly lines up with when Oswald was discharged. And I believe they were, I'm not sure if it's true, but Nagel alleged that he was stationed at Atsugi in Japan at the same time Oswald was as well. But like I said, I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, the thing is that it is possible. It is possible that he was at Atsugi, but I know that Atsugi had multiple bases, that compound. So there was a counterintelligence training school in Japan nearby, but it wasn't in the same base as where people like Oswald would have been.
Right.
So it's possible that they were there at the same time. Nagel later on claims that he met Oswald, but when we go into that, I'll show you the problems with that.
Okay.
So yeah, that's basically the first couple documents. Then, so Nagel's gone to Mexico, and in the third document, he appears at the American consulate in Mexico City, and is described as tense, nervous, and agitated. That sounds familiar. And antagonistic.
Yeah, his story sounds a little familiar, you know?
It sounds almost like Oswald heard about this guy and was like, wow, I'm going to do something very similar. So Nagel claimed he was approached in Mexico City for recruitment, but he would not identify what nation or person approached him. He says this to the American embassy workers.
Right at the time. I think later he does disclose who he was approached by, I think.
Yeah, so Nagel asserts one job of this sort would be in New York. He then tells officials that he understood his claims might be used against him legally. Nagel stated that he was bitter, disgusted, disillusioned, and disaffected. He stated if he did go to some other country, it would cost the United States millions. He stated he was through being a good citizen and claimed he had gotten a dirty deal all around, which is in reference, I imagine, to how he got discharged from the Alcoholic Control Bureau. Because Nagel... it gets worse later on, but though he might have been justified in some of his claims about officials, he starts to blame officials and other people for a lot of things that he's kind of the author of. Same document, October 1st, he returns to the American Embassy and questioned the staff on the status of his claim against the state of California. Nagel asked what section of the embassy should he contact to renounce his U.S. citizenship. He was advised by the collections section of the embassy that they could not intercede for him in collecting money from the state of California. So he's in Mexico at the American embassy trying to get them to do something about the problem he's having with the state of California.
Makes sense, I guess. Not really, but I mean...
he wasn't making headway in America, so he thought that if he went to Mexico, that would help.
Crazy.
And I hate to say that. Normally, you and I have both faced it. I'm sure anybody that has a reasonable belief in conspiracy based on substantial evidence has gotten someone call them crazy or a kook. That was one of the things that I despised that people would call me early on before they realized how much evidence I use.
Right.
But... yeah, unfortunately, Nagel is acting very kooky, but with him, we actually have a basis. The crash, the disfigurement, how his life wasn't going as well as it had. There are reasons why he is unraveling, but I don't think that it's not. It's real mental illness, and I think people, like I was talking to you earlier about. This is one of the few that I actually kind of felt depressed afterwards, a little sad, because I really think that he didn't understand what was going on sometimes, and he didn't realize that they were just shadows he was chasing.
Yeah. Now, well, something caught my mind. Back in this time, in the late 50s, early 60s, we know that the CIA was experimenting with different forms of mind control, MK Ultra, things of this nature. And I've seen it said that Richard Case Nagel is referred to as a Manchurian candidate. As if something was done to him, to make him act this way, that he's not just necessarily just batshit crazy for 15 years and then back to normal. Or normal, batshit crazy, back to normal. That maybe...
No, and that's possible.
Yeah, because I think when he was... I can't remember when it was. I think it was in 59? Maybe 57. He was when he was being trained for military intelligence in Maryland.
Yeah,
pretty close to, these other places like Fort Meade and Fort Hood and some of the places where this stuff was going on, like these experimentations. Is it out of the realm of possibility to think that he might have been tampered with in some form or fashion? Given,
I don't think.
Given the weird similarities that we're seeing to the way Oswald was acting.
Yeah, I don't think that's outside. I don't think in Nagel's case that's outside the realm of possibility, and I also don't think that it's outside the realm of possibility that it might have been just the CIA. The CIA could have been doing that or not, but because Nagel was contacting, as we'll see in some of the later documents, he was in contact with foreign powers as well, or who he thought they were foreign powers. So those people too could have been drugging him or using him for whatever purpose. There's definitely a lot of possibilities. I don't write everything Nagel says off as crazy. There's definitely some problems and inconsistencies, which I think, reduce the chances of a lot of his claims being true. But somebody could have definitely been using him, even as a distraction, just to see how officials would react.
Right, because he later claimed to be a double or even a triple agent for the U.S. and the KGB. Going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. That's some deep doo-doo, for lack of a better word there. But who the hell knows?
Well, I think that hopefully by the end of this, we'll definitely give the listeners a clearer picture of Nagel, and then they can make whatever decisions they want. But I think that we'll be able to at least answer some of the questions regarding the JFK case.
Gotcha.
So he goes to the consulate. He says it would cost the U.S. millions. October 1st, 1962, he returns to the American Embassy in Mexico, and he questions the staff on the status of his claim with the state of California. Nagel asked, what section, I talked about, he wanted to renounce where would he go to renounce his U.S. citizenship? He was advised by the collection section of the embassy they could not intercede. He seemed intent to incite officials and question what the penalty for going to an Iron Curtain country and the effect it would have on his citizenship. Nagel was told it would violate federal laws by the embassy.
Right.
So, the fourth document. So Nagel leaves Mexico in late October, and November 16, 1962, he advises the FBI in New York City that he wants to expose the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control in California. In December, Nagel contacts the FBI and claims he was prior approached in Washington, D.C. by an individual believed to be working for the Soviets. He was recorded to be drunk and was unclear in answering questions. 5 days later, at the Bay of Pines Veterans Hospital in Florida, he is diagnosed with chronic brain syndrome associated with brain trauma with behavioral reaction characterized by passive-aggressive and paranoid features. And so I think we can definitely say that Nagel's prior crash had long-term effects on his mental state, despite the Army officials still utilizing him. That might be one of the biggest things that goes unsaid, according to Nagel, as far as regarding Nagel, is that he might have been having mental problems when they let him in to the counterintelligence training. And they basically pushed him along knowing that could be going on.
Yeah. Certainly possible.
So, I think it's definitely worth noting that, they were going to use him no matter what, as far as counterintelligence training, and then that would make it possible, as you said, that someone might have used him after that, whether it was official or non-official.
Yeah, it's quite possible. Because either way, when we get to some of his later claims about what he was assigned to technically possibly do.
Still there, Rob?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Damn mute. I was saying, as we'll see a little later, once we get into what he was possibly assigned to do, why it really wouldn't have mattered or not whether he was all there. You know what I'm saying? At least what he alleges that they wanted him to do, which is why he did what he did in the bank.
Yeah, so then going back to the Garrison document, it would be page 45, and I believe the last one was 44. So yeah, page later from the second document, because some of these, they intertwine. So yeah, that would describe the hospital episode that we just talked about, where he gets the paranoid features and passive aggressive diagnosis. So then, January 1963, Nagel again contacts the FBI. He inquires, and this will be the fifth, I believe, the fifth document. He inquires if his Cuban or Russian sources gave him a pistol with silencer and microfilm, would he be permitted to give them to his contact? Okay. Nagel doesn't have a contact at the FBI, not an official one anyway, that is acknowledged or verified. So, but he has been in contact with the FBI. So maybe there's a person that he would often call that they just don't mention.
And this was in early 63, you said?
Yeah, this is 63.
Okay.
This is January 63.
Okay.
So officials ignore this request, and Nagel proceeds to tell them of an unnamed man from Maryland in Mexico City that he asserts introduced him to individuals whom he believed were possibly Soviet agents.
Huh.
So a few months later, I believe April or May, he contacts the FBI in Los Angeles to discuss that he took his wife to court for visitation rights with his children. In June, Nagel visits a clinic and was referred to a neurological clinic for treatment. His diagnosis includes depression, tearful and nervous behavior, and the only phrase he would tell the doctors was, he's got to see his kids. So I think that, you have the alcoholic board, not alcohol board, alcoholic, sorry. The alcohol board terminating him in 62, basically cutting off his money. His wife takes his kids away from him. He's had no visitation with them for an extended amount of time. And he's already got the prior existing condition.
Yeah, and then now they're diagnosing him with something else, and he can't seem to get right. And yeah, I mean, this is a guy whose life has taken a drastic turn for the worse within a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, and in some cases unfairly. I think it would be hard for someone without any problems to deal with that whole situation. So, then you add all of the other problems he has, and it probably makes it fairly unbearable, which is why he was only saying the same thing to the doctors over and over. So, September 20th, a few months later, 1963, Nagel was arrested for attempting to rob a state bank. He consistently denied that from the document, he consistently denied he had tried to rob the bank, stated the fact that he fired 2 shots into the ceiling proved he had not been trying to hit anyone. Nagel states that all of my problems have been solved for a long time, and now I won't have to go to Cuba. Some unaware of Nagel's years of the claims with the Soviets or Cuba believe that Nagel was connected to Lee Harvey Oswald. This would be due to the timing of his bank episode and the general similarities regarding the two men. So while Oswald and Nagel were in Mexico, they both did visit diplomatic compounds, though Oswald allegedly went to the Soviet and Cuban embassies seeking to travel to Cuba, according to officials. Yet Nagel never directly attempts to leave for any Soviet-aligned country. He asks and threatens to abandon his citizenship, as Oswald once did, but Nagel never does. He initiates contact with officials and embassy for years, preceding any mention of Oswald. And a notebook that Nagel is apprehended with, it makes reference, now here are where the similarities where I think, people have drawn the illusion between the two of them. It did make mention of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and it did make an organization that Oswald claimed he served in New Orleans, but we know that, he made himself the head of a chapter that didn't exist. Oswald used the alias, this was also in Nagel's notebook, Oswald used the alias Alec Heidel, and Nagel had fake ID cards in his possession for Albert Hidel, Hidel. If the names exactly matched, I would agree there's a connection, but they don't. And it is a strange coincidence, but I don't think that proves that it's the same person, you know what I mean?
Right.
It is possible. I'm not going to say that it's impossible, anything's possible, but Alec Heidel and Albert Hidel aren't the same.
Now, did he have any Oswald information on him at that time at the bank?
According to the documents, no.
Because I always heard he had a copy of his selective service identification.
Oh, I'm sure that got added in over time. But according to the document, I mean, and one is the police report and one's an FBI report. Or actually, I'm sorry, one's a police report, one's the CIA report. And they did have, like, the Albert Hiddle thing was there, so I could see how that easily could have got turned into Alec Heidel.
Right.
And he did have, among his possessions, there was a list of 6 people, and each person was possibly a CIA employee. But I think that, and this goes into the next document, I think that though that would support Nagel having classified knowledge, we have to remember he was in military intelligence.
Right.
So Nagel used that classified knowledge and then claimed to be a CIA employee based on it when they questioned him about it. But the name Richard Fechtow was one of the names on Nagel's list. He was shot down in Manchuria in November of 1952. And Fechtow was quoted in the press admitting he was a CIA employee. So that's how Nagel could have gotten that information from him. The other names, the thing is that each of the names could have been a CIA employee. There were people that matched the names, but it was a letter initial and the last name. So it isn't necessarily they were the exact people that were from the CIA. Like the other name was C. Churchill, and that wasn't identified by the agency, but they do say that it could have been Creighton Churchill, who was in Japan in 1952, another person that Nagel could have had contact with or could have read a file about, because he was in Japan in the same area of influence that Nagel was.
Right.
And it's possible that some or even most on the list did work for the agency, but some of them were definitely people that Nagel could have had access to their information or observed in his prior service or been in the same city, stationed in the same city that they were. So it's possible in his interactions with officials that he made contact or even just observed these people, made the assumption, and made his list. So, additionally, there are several examples of agencies employed various unrelated people with similar names and using pseudonyms or aliases to confuse outside parties. 4 of those contacted on the list stated they never met Nagel, but we know that they wouldn't admit it even if they had. The agency does neither confirms nor denies anything.
Yep.
So the list, I don't think it proves that he was connected to the agency beyond his, what we can verify that he was in counterintelligence training in the military. But I think he might have had insights from his prior military experiences and his repeated official appearances and the information the press provided. So they can be. I think that it's reasonable to think that some, even all, of the people on the list were CIA, but he would have had knowledge of many of them. It is possible that he got in contact by some nefarious means with a member of the CIA that was on that list, but he could never prove it. He only basically had the list, had the Hiddle thing, and had the fair play for Cuba.
Gotcha. So, real quick, I was looking up this ID question here,
Mm-hmm.
and I ran across where it stated, of course, it's not cited, but where it says Richard Case Nagel was arrested in September 1963 with a near exact copy of Oswald's fake Selective Service ID card.
Well, I would assume that would be the Hiddle.
No, this is the Lee H. Oswald.
Oh, no. What I'm saying is they're misinterpreting what the Hiddle card was. Because the only card that was on him, according to the arrest report, was the Hiddle card.
No, they have a photocopy here of it,
but that could be manipulated.
It's possible, yeah.
Unless we have an original. I just think that to me, it would seem a lot more likely that they took the Albert Hiddle and ran with it, rather than because I don't understand why it wouldn't be in the security file on Nagel if he actually had that, because they have everything else that he had.
Yeah, I'll send it to you because it's
okay.
it's
No, I believe you that somebody.
Yeah. Well, the difference this is, of course, there's a different picture on the identification, and there's no stamp on it like the one that Lee Oswald had, and the signature is definitely not Lee Harvey Oswald's signature. But I'll send it to you and
okay.
see what you think.
And we should also consider it could have been made after.
this is true because we haven't found anywhere where this is turned up in the official record, at least not yet. So if anybody out there knows anything about this identification, and if in fact Richard Case Nagel had this on him when he was arrested, point us in that general direction of official documents, please.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to look at any documents if they have them. It's and it's not. I don't think it's unreasonable that this could have evolved from the Hiddle thing. It's close. You know what I mean? And unlike you or I, who probably pause a little bit more just to double check everything before we go out there are some people that'll just go out and say, "Well, Hiddle's Heidel."
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that. It's just this is what I was talking about when.
Okay.
I knew I'd seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
It's an actual copy or fake of Oswald's fake Selective Service card in his name.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the. Okay. So while you're looking for that, I'm going to go on to the next document. It says that Nagel also had on him beyond the Hiddle card and the list. He had receipts for registered mail. This is the Hoover letter. Receipts for registered mail that included one from the date Nagel would later claim proves he mailed J. Edgar Hoover a warning about the Kennedy assassination. Now, he did have an envelope, and the envelope did have a registered mail tag that it was sent on the day to Hoover, and he sent a couple others to other officials, but it was an empty envelope. It was opened. There was no letter in it. So without the letter, the receipt doesn't prove anything other than he sent a registered mail to Hoover.
Right.
And once again, people might have tried to make more of that than it actually was. Yes, he did have the letter. Yes, it was registered to Hoover. It was before the assassination, but there was no letter. So, and of course, on the other end, even if a letter that had nothing to do with the Kennedy assassination arrived, I have no doubt Hoover would suppress it.
Yeah.
So, unless we can find that letter, once again, this comes up as a dead end.
Yeah, it hasn't turned up yet. So.
Yeah. I have a feeling if it did exist, it was probably in some of the files that Gandhi burned.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay, so then we go from there. Nagel's cellmate in prison. Now, this is where it kind of gets, in my opinion, starts to get a little sad about him. Because Nagel's cellmate in prison alleged that following Nagel's discharge from the Army and suffering from his crash injuries, he decided everything was against him in Los Angeles and made arrangements with the Communist Party to pick up a visa and passport from a contact in El Paso, Texas. But Nagel was afraid to do so. Yeah, so he basically, seemingly based on this, what his cellmate tells, that he tried to defect again, sort of. Except this time he was going to go through with it. They were going to give him the documents, but he was afraid to go through with it. So officials noted that a State Department file discloses about Nagel that he had prior claimed his passport was lost or stolen, which might imply that he surrendered it to the Soviets. Nagel was issued a new passport on August 6, 1963. Nagel, according to officials who checked him and a doctor and the cellmate, reportedly attempted suicide 3 times on the way to the bank. They just found cuts all over his wrists. And so his actions may suggest that Nagel, due to his mental instability and confusion, might have dealt with a communist surrogate and believed the only way to break the association was to be exposed and arrested or to kill himself.
Right, because now I believe he asserted that was part of this story to Hoover that he was assigned to actually kill Oswald, right?
Yeah. The couple of versions that I've come across were one was to kill Oswald, and the other was that he was going to actually be involved somehow in the plot. It isn't very specific, the thing that I saw. Right,
or end up being the patsy, and then he figured that out. Yeah,
and I think, that's the as much as the conflicts with Nagel exist. Boy, he would have been perfect. If I was planning a conspiracy, this is definitely the guy to use because he's totally unreliable as far as anyone would think.
Right.
So I definitely understand why he's gone around so many times the mill, why Nagel has consistently come up again and again. There are a lot of details about him that would have been useful as a patsy, but it's just, people in their desire to use him grasp at a few things that just don't end up panning out. So, so this is the original. Before the Kennedy story comes up in '64 from Nagel, Nagel will not tell the press why he robbed the bank, despite his claims later. At his trial on November 4th, 1963, Nagel states, "I had a motive for doing what I did, but my motive was not to hold up the bank. I do not intend to disclose my motive at this time." In December, following the assassination of President Kennedy, Morena Oswald is asked if she had any knowledge of Nagel, because Nagel says that he had met the Oswalds and he had a short acquaintance with Oswald. And Morena Oswald disclaims any knowledge of Nagel, says she's never seen him.
He'd been disfigured in this plane crash, so he would have been like a memorable type dude. I mean, his face was a little jacked up on that one side. But, I mean, he wasn't, like Frankenstein or anything looking, but...
Yeah, definitely you would have seen him.
yeah, he was memorable. Because I think he was a pretty big dude, too, like, height-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Broad shoulders.
Yeah, he was former military, and I'm sure that he definitely cut a figure at the time before the crash. But yeah, after the crash, I would definitely think if Nagel had made repeated appearances, like is claimed by some, with Oswald, Morena would have seen him or remembered him.
Right.
So, then what are we on? I want to make sure, because I know we burned through it. 1, 2, 3, 4... 5, 6, 7, document 8. Nagel, at the beginning of 1964, fails to mention any connection to a specific assassination plot and will not give the motive for his actions to officials. Nagel then attempts to explain himself with the following claim. On January 4th, 1964, Nagel submits a statement from jail. In the statement, he claims that while visiting Mexico City, an unnamed person from an unknown government proposed a plot to him in 1962 that he refused. This is after the Oswald story comes out, and some of the details have been in the press for months. So, not to say that Nagel was doing it. I mean, it is possible, but he had access to. He can make his story start to sound like Oswald more because it had already happened. These aren't like insights coming from a guy before any of the Oswald stuff's in the press.
Right.
So the alleged plot that calls for Nagel's participation is, he asserts, to have been again presented to him in May 1963, and he said he then agreed to this plot. Nagel states in September 63 he refused to undertake the plan when again contacted by the unknown foreign contact. Nagel claims if he did not participate, a threat was made to release derogatory information to the FBI, which, honestly, to me, that just sounds ridiculous, because what the hell could they put out that hadn't already been put out by some officials at that point? But anyway. However, this reason is invalid since the FBI had already obtained large amounts of conflicting and derogatory information just from the prior contacts Nagel himself had made with them. I mean, they didn't need to make him look any worse.
Right.
If they wanted to really slam him, they could just pull out every contact he had made since '59.
Yeah, and every doctor visit.
Yeah, and there were at least 3 of those. So yeah, his unnamed figure and unknown government contact, too, suggests a vague plot that he never mentions before the Kennedy assassination. So that's where I have some questions. Nagel did prior allude to strange possibilities, but little beyond his claims support the evolving ideas. Notably, we should regard Nagel's attempt to use the claim to prove he was not guilty and deserved to be released. Nagel tried to say because that it had something to do with the Kennedy assassination, he should be released because he's giving this information.
Right.
So he then is committed for 30 days to a psychiatric observation, and then is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Nagel, while he's in custody in jail being transferred, he swallows several sleeping pills while lodged at the El Paso County Jail and almost dies. Here's my question. officials do not explain how he gained access to the pills.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't think that to be readily available. But then again, maybe it might have been part of his medical treatment.
Could be. You're right. I didn't even consider. I think that's strange that but I mean, yeah.
And he might have stockpiled him. And
yeah, you're right. So yeah, he tries to kill himself again.
Because I believe,
prison.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he served the entire 10 years. I believe they did another review of him and deemed him to be competent and let him out of prison.
Yeah, that happened a few times during the course of the events too. Is that Nagel? He would have moments of lucidity where he was fine.
Yeah, I think he was only in there like 4.5 years. I think, and they let him out.
It was reduced, but I don't know the exact number. But yeah, I know it was reduced, and I know that later on they did find him to be lucid, even though he keeps shifting back and forth.
Yeah, which makes you wonder if this paranoia or mental condition is not necessarily legit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But,
is he? Yeah, I mean, that's like we talked about earlier. It's possible. I definitely think he had some problems. Now, how much control he had over them is definitely the issue.
Right.
And so, what I think I was happy that I was able to find this in the security file, but it was the statement of Nagel's sister. Because she was the one who pretty much had the most, that I could find, personal contact. He lived with her for a time. So she basically got to see him up close, where a lot of people, just speculated on him. So Nagel, so the unnamed figure, there's the suicide attempt. So evidence and the statement of Nagel's sister, Eleanor Gambert, with whom he later resided, contradict his Kennedy assassination claims. Gambert, during an interview with the FBI, this is right after the bank robbery, offered that she has no reason to believe that her brother is not responsible for his actions, and she noted that in one letter he wrote to her that the bank robbery attempt was a premeditated action on his part. She advised her brother had been in a depressed state of mind ever since he had been accused of taking a bribe and fired from his position with the California State Liquor Authority. Now, I don't think that her words are definitive, but I think they make a lot more sense. That, like we were talking about earlier, his life was falling apart. So basically, he was doing anything he could to try to stop that. And eventually, I think, he, despite realizing what some of the probably more reasonable motivations for what he did at the bank, he came up with that story because, it could be a million different reasons. Embarrassment, maybe he didn't remember. He, at the time, had 3 suicide attempts, so it's not like he was in the best state of mind. I think her statement's reasonable. I don't think she had a reason to lie about her brother, especially since she ended up opening her house to him.
Right, yeah, I think he was only there for like 6 months or so, right? Mostly unemployed at the time.
Yeah, I mean, she could have had motivations. Maybe they didn't get along. There could be reasoning, but I just don't see it right after. I knew she was probably mad at her brother for doing, what he did, but I don't really see a reason that she's just going to make up, those. It's accurate as far as the files go. That, he was going through a lot at that time, and, people have done crazier things for less. So, in my opinion.
Right.
Okay, so I know I'm trying to make this less sad. Like I told you,
I'm starting to tear up over here, man.
No, the farther I got with this, I was like, normally it doesn't bother me. Like I said, I'm pretty callous from all the horrific stuff we've seen in these files, but with this one, it's just like, man, poor guy. Okay, so in time, Nagel's claims evolve. This is the 9th document, I believe. In a subsequent Ramparts magazine interview, Nagel purports from Leavenworth Prison that he was a CIA agent. However, we know that no evidence confirms this. None that, anyway, has been presented. He was in the military intelligence prior, but was not verifiably used by the agency. And the military had discharged him long before. An internal agency file states that the subject's file reflects no agency interest in him prior to March 1964, when the names of CIA employees were found in his possession when arrested for a bank robbery. So the agency didn't really take any interest in him until they found out that he might have a list of possible agents.
Gotcha.
which isn't unreasonable. They would have really had no reason because he was in military intelligence and he wasn't officially assigned. There were people definitely that crossed over, like Colonel Sheffield Edwards, who was fairly up in the agency. You know, there were definitely examples of people who did both, but with Nagel, he wasn't really in that long. So there's no reason to believe that he automatically would have had agency affiliation. The only contact the agency sought with him was to determine how he was in possession of classified material. Now, privately in the memo, the author even from the agency even says that his 10-year sentence was harsh due to the brain damage that Nagel prior suffered. They thought that he shouldn't have gone to jail for as long as he did. But Ramparts correctly states that Nagel was a highly decorated captain in Korea, and he did graduate the Military Intelligence Academy after the crash. However, Nagel has a developing mental illness and possibly did not immediately or consistently manifest, so that oversight might explain why Nagel's improbable story could not. You know, I mean, he tells Ramparts basically a different version of what happened, and we can see that just from his prior statements.
Right.
So now it's not just that he was somehow involved with the assassination, it's he worked for the CIA, and he was involved with the assassination, and that's where it's that they describe it, I believe, as Manchurian Candidate, and then in another... Later on, the last document is Nagel actually writing to complain to somebody about calling him a Manchurian Candidate in one of their news articles. After the Ramparts article, Nagel's later story asserts to Ramparts that he staged the affair, the bank robbery, because he wanted to be in custody as an alibi when the assassination took place. Yet Nagel's statements and claims before the Kennedy assassination prove that this latest claim is not reliable. It's merely the first in the series of claims.
Right.
Rampart states, you know, he did send a registered letter to J. Edgar Hoover, and we know he did have the dated envelope, but no letter was ever actually produced. And it wasn't in the article, so I assume he never gave Ramparts that letter. So the FBI and later President's Commission take a statement from Nagel, which Nagel states his association with Oswald was purely social, and he had met him in Texas and Mexico, but we know that Moreno said they had never met. And Oswald didn't go to the American embassies in Mexico, so there's no reason to believe that they ever crossed paths either, and Nagel was there at different times most of the time. So here's where I really started to have some doubts in Nagel because of how it's not just officials he tries to blame. I'll say that. Following Nagel's statements in the media, he was visited by New Orleans prosecutor Jim Garrison. Nagel told officials on a seeming lucid day of prior informing Garrison he had no information of use to him. Nagel also spoke to officials and stated fearing that Garrison might subpoena him and the CIA might try to eliminate him. He said the CIA fear was planted in his mind by Garrison. So now he's kind of playing both sides against the other.
Right. Well, I can see Garrison telling him that. Say, look, the CIA is asking about you, breathing down my neck, to say you got information, just, it wouldn't be easy to disturb an easily disturbable man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, I just think that, it's like, for me, it's the beginning of a pattern. Like, he's blaming the Alcoholic Commission for his firing. Then he's blaming the CIA and, foreign agents for him getting arrested. And then he's saying that it had to do with the Kennedy assassination. And then he's saying that Jim Garrison is the one who put this fear in his mind. I'm sure the fear was already there based on all the other stuff. But I just, he starts to start blaming these ghosts that are kind of his own creation on other people. So, yeah, I think Garrison could have said that to him. I just think that he might have blown it out of proportion.
Okay.
And like you said, he was easily disturbed. So, and then the next two documents basically are corroborative of just this little section that Nagel arrived in Zurich, Switzerland, and he makes repeated threats at the American embassy to expose the U.S. government for their role in his alleged persecution. So now he threatened the embassy people in Mexico. Now he's threatening them in Zurich. He goes to Europe to launch this series of threats. So I believe we're in the last couple of documents. Kind because the last two were just, the first one was the actual Zurich cable, and the other was a summary of what Nagel said when he was there. In the cable it says, Nagel last appeared at Zurich Consulate morning, 7 March, and stated if he received no satisfaction by 5 o'clock that afternoon, he would carry out his threats and expose the U.S. government on radio, television, and in the press. He then disappeared, nothing further heard from him, and no publicity given. Monday, March 10th, Consulate Zurich advised by telephone from Consulate Barcelona that Nagel had approached them and made similar threats. So he then goes from Switzerland to Spain. Or calls Spain, by telephone, calls Spain, and then threatens them. Okay, so this is where, even stranger. It gets even stranger. So Nagel, for some reason, decides that he might like to defect to the Soviet Union or to an Iron Curtain country. So he decides to travel through East Germany on the far side of the wall and was captured and questioned by Eastern officials. They hold him and accuse him of being a spy for months. And Nagel's defense was pretending to be more mentally ill than he actually was, according to Nagel when he gives his interview when he's released.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So he can turn it on and turn it off when he wants to.
Exactly. Apparently he has some facility with turning it on and off. So Nagel affirms to officials that he no longer believes it is realistic to think the CIA was trying to kill him. He termed himself chronically paranoid. One Army psychiatrist describes Nagel as currently not psychotic and seems competent in the legal and psychiatric sense. Yet his diverging actions and all the other medical opinions would support that sometimes he is overcome with paranoid psychosis. So Nagel eventually is freed by acting crazier than he is. He's returned to West Germany, and a psychiatrist whose report is submitted to the Department of State examines him. After listing Nagel's major biographic points, the document states that pondering his prior attempted bank robbery was bred out of his feelings of hopelessness and desperation. He claims that in a confused way he attempted, while armed, to rob a bank and was easily apprehended. We also should consider that Nagel had 3 prison-ordered psychiatric evaluations and hospitalizations, and then the 4 suicide attempts. So, noted American neurologist Dr. Edwin Weinstein is eventually consulted, and he interprets Nagel's medical data as being abnormal and argued that Nagel had developed a paranoid personality and instability. So Nagel then attempts to blame some of his problems on Ramparts magazine for publishing the very claims he made. Just as he prior blamed Jim Garrison, the CIA, the U.S. government, and others. So
I guess they're basically saying that he might have been mildly schizophrenic. Is that the same thing as paranoid? What they called back then?
Paranoid psychosis. Yeah, I would think that. Yeah, either schizophrenia or just
delusional,
some type of delusional state that he goes into. Now, based on his actions in East Germany, you're right. You never know. He might not. He might be crazy as a fox. Maybe he just turns it on, or maybe he already has something and then just gives into it and turns it up to get done what wants to get done. So, yeah. And then, that's sent in an airgram to the Department of State. Then the final document, this is a letter Nagel writes in 1975 to the editor of the Los Angeles Free Press. As the years go on, in 75, Nagel writes a letter for corrections. He wants corrections and submits it regarding the media's implied connection of him to Oswald. Nagel states that the story titled Bank Robber Manchurian Candidate linked to JFK-assassination probe. He requests that the paper either print a retraction of such lies and distortions or publish his submitted letter. In his letter, Nagel states that the author William Turner knowingly and purposefully cited numerous lies about me. He states that Professor Richard H. Popkin, from Turner obviously collected much of his latest baloney, these are Nagel's words, is a character that I feel should either be purchase a hearing aid or consult a psychiatrist.
And this is the author of the second Oswald, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny that Nagel is someone's psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Nagel then covers the article portion he disputes and says that these include saying that he never stated to anybody verbally or in writing that in 1963 I was an agent for the CIA. But we know that that's not true because he did say that later on. I don't know if he said 63, but we know for sure he told Ramparts he was a CIA agent. Although in 1964 I did state under oath that I thought I have been functioning for the CIA during part of 1963.
Right.
Nagel claims he never worked for Cuban intelligence nor any other person to undertake the assassination. Especially in light of his mental episodes, I'd say that this is pretty observably inconsistent. You know, I mean, he's basically saying that he didn't say a lot of the things we know he said, unless all the other sources are lying, which I think is highly improbable.
Right.
Especially, you know, when you consider his sister was one of them.
Yeah.
So I'd say based on corroborative evidence, you know, there's definitely unanswered questions with Nagel, and there's definitely possibilities, like you said, that he could have been used by officials, non-officials, you know, by some source, even as a distraction or just serving as disinformation for whatever goal. But I don't find that he has any, you know, discernible, definitive connection to the Kennedy assassination.
Now, do we know if he was investigated as part of the HSCA?
Yeah, we know that I believe at least one picture of him exists, and they looked into some of it, but yeah, they couldn't discern whether or not, beyond his statements, if there's any truth to it. Because at the time, a lot of these files that we went over were classified. So the CIA didn't offer up a lot of security files.
Right. Because I got a little something here, if that wraps you up there, Carmine, on that.
Yeah.
Okay. I got a little something here. Of course, everybody is familiar out there with the book by author Dick Russell, The Man Who Knew Too Much. It is all about Richard Case Nagel's story. And I would highly recommend that everybody out there check it out. It's a very well-written book. And, you know, Dick Russell actually had correspondence with Richard Case Nagel. Now, the problem is, of course, that Richard Case Nagel swore that he had a life insurance, which is what he called it, is certain pieces of evidence that would surface in the event of his death. And this stuff was said to include an audio tape recording of a conversation Nagel secretly made of himself, Lee Oswald, and several alleged assassination conspirators, and a photograph of Nagel and Oswald together in New Orleans in 1963. Now, staff members of Probe, the newsletter for CTKA, report going to Nagel's apartment as soon as they learned of his death. Now, Nagel actually died on November 1st of, I believe, 1995. They got to his apartment on November the 4th. They write that the inside door to the apartment was open and one could look inside. The place appeared to be barren. If Nagel left anything of importance behind, it doesn't seem to have been there anymore. And this said life insurance never has surfaced. So will we ever know, you know? I mean,
I think that might be similar to the threat that he made to officials when he said that it would all go to the press. You know,
yeah.
He would expose everything, and it would cost them millions, and nothing ever gets turned up.
Yeah, no, he was 65 at the time he died. It was claimed to be a heart attack. I believe it was 1 week before. I believe he was going to be talking to the AARB. I believe they were in contact with him as well, under the auspices of Dick Russell. So, you know, is his death a coincidence? You know, timing? You know, it's hard to say. You know, a lot of people say that Nagel, you know, of course, who claimed to have foreknowledge of the JFK assassination and the activities of Lee Oswald, was considered to be one of the last people alive, possibly, with information that could crack the Kennedy case. So, you know, will we ever know the actual truth? his life insurance, this so-called evidence has never surfaced. It was claimed not to have been there by, the people that came and got his body, the investigators, the police, but according to these staff members of Probe, that the apartment was cleaned, in quotations. There was nothing at all having to do with the Kennedy assassination whatsoever found there.
And to be honest, I don't know if there ever was. I mean, it's possible, but if Nagel actually had information like that, it would be in a safe deposit box.
Right.
He wouldn't have just stuck it under his bed in his apartment.
Right.
In my opinion.
Right, but why hasn't it surfaced? I mean, you'd think he would give somebody access to this stuff to say, "Hey, look, if I die, and get this to every news outlet on the planet." Yeah.
And who knows how lucid he was at the end? I mean, if real brain damage had progressed, he could have been, really bad at the very end. I've worked a couple of times with Alzheimer's and dementia patients, and they have, as they get older, it progressively gets worse and worse until they can almost not function. I'm not saying it's the exact same with Nagel. He didn't have Alzheimer's, to my knowledge, or dementia, but he did. He had delusional aspects, definitely, to his psychosis.
Yeah, well, when Dick Russell was speaking at a conference in '95, he said this. He said, quote, "And then, as the conversation went on, it became to seem very strange to me, because he hadn't even mentioned the fact that I'd written this book, this massive book about him. And finally, I'd also written him a number of letters when I was putting the book together, hoping that he would get back in touch with me at that time. So I said, Dick," referring to Nagel, "I'm really glad to hear from you, but," I said, "I wrote you a number of letters over the last few years." And he said, "Oh, really? I think maybe I've gotten one or two of them." And I said, "You are aware that I've written a huge unauthorized biography of you, right?" And he said he had no idea. I had sent him the book, and obviously he had never received it. I think he was telling me the truth. He began going on about how the post office was still checking on his mail, and somebody was running off with his stuff, and he had no idea. So I said, "I can't believe none of your friends wouldn't have told you that this book was out." He said, "Well, I don't have that many friends, and the ones I do don't speak. A lot of them don't even speak English." So,
okay.
He doesn't sound very lucid there near the end.
Yes, that doesn't sound very lucid. Good, that's a good one, man. I'm glad that I can rely on you and Chuck to give the book some of the more interesting book information.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a hell of a quote.
That is a hell of a quote, and like I said, Dick Russell, he had been trying to get in contact with Nagel. He knew where he lived. He had sent him letters. He tried calling him, and nothing. And until the book actually had come out, he actually got in touch with him, and Nagel didn't even know it, or at least he stated that he never knew what was going on. And of course, the correspondence we have after that is just prior to his death. Of course, came after the book was out, and I'm not sure if he updated the book after Nagel's death with the new information. I'm actually getting to talk to Nagel, but I think because my copy is like a first gen copy, so it doesn't have any of that in it. But I know Dick Russell's still out there, and I might try to get him on the show in the future. I mean, I think that'd be kind of interesting, huh?
Yeah, that'd be cool to listen to.
Get his
definitely be interested, to see what his interactions, if they're all as strange as that one.
From somebody that actually got to talk to him back then. But yeah, cool. Well, so that about wraps it up on Richard Case Nagel, huh, Carmine?
Yeah, I think that we were kind as we possibly could be, and usually I don't try to be kind, as I want the bare facts. But with him, the bare facts are kind of sad at some points, and confusing. And it doesn't surprise me that so many people have conflicting ideas about him, because he had conflicting ideas about himself. He told different versions to different people, and it all got mixed up in the historical record.
Yeah, and the one thing that bothers me is if and I sent you the picture on Facebook for you to check it out of this ID. If this is genuine, then we got a problem, okay? Because it throws a gigantic wrench into everything. If Richard Case Nagel had a photocopy of a false copy of Oswald's false Secret Service identification, or not Secret Service, Selective Service identification, then that's a whole another gigantic, huge problem and another question with no answer. Like I said, if anybody else out there knows the provenance of this image that I found, then I will post it over at tlgpodcast.com so you can see it with your own two eyes. It's clearly a fake. It's the signature clearly does not look like Lee Oswald's. It's got a different picture, no stamp, but the numbers are the same. The information on the card is the same. And I remember reading somewhere that it was found among his possessions in his trunk when he was arrested for allegedly robbing this bank. And of course I can't remember where I read that, but if anybody knows anything about it, get at us. You can shoot me an email at thelonegunmanpodcast@gmail.com or hit me or Carmine up on Facebook. We greatly appreciate it. Are you looking at it yet there, Carmine?
Yeah, no, I'm looking at it. No, I don't doubt that it might be the exact same one. I just would, you need a first generation copy of it that can be verified by photo experts because, I mean, as you know, I usually don't comment almost at all.
Yeah.
On the photography stuff just because it's been manipulated so many times.
Yeah, I would just want
necessarily this, but yeah.
Yeah, I would just want to know the provenance of that because if that actual photo on the left, which is a photocopy allegedly found with Nagel's possessions, that before the assassination, then we got a problem. But
I'm sorry, I was going to say if you could send me a link of the website, I'll check out just to.
Well, I just found that image. It was in a
Google Images. Okay.
Yeah, well, it was in a discussion thread on some weird website, like Above Top Secret or something. But yeah, like I said, I have no provenance on the picture. I just remember reading about it somewhere, and I cannot for the life of me remember where this information is coming from that is stuck in my brain in the deep recesses. But if anybody out there knows that where this image comes from, or if we have any documentation about it, get at us and let us know, because it would definitely maybe change perceptions a little bit if it can be proven that this ID was included among Richard Case Nagel's possessions before the assassination. But like I said, we have no verifiable proof of that as of yet. Fake stuff pops up all the time, but fake evidence pops up all the time. So if anybody knows anything about this identification card that is clearly not Lee Oswald's, allegedly found with Richard Case Nagel when he was arrested, get at us one way or the other. Email, Facebook. We're not hard to find. On Twitter, whatever. Carmine, if you would please plug away. Tell people where they can find your book. Tell people where they can follow you at on Twitter and Facebook, and tell everybody a little bit about what you're going to be doing this November.
Okay, thanks. People can find the book at tpac.com, tpaak.com, Two Princes and a King. We also have primary evidence collections there with a lot of evidence that you might not have seen in other places, and anything new that I or anyone in the Neapolis Media Group finds. You can find Neapolis Media Group at neamg.com. As Rob said earlier, I'm going to be speaking at the NID conference for JFK Lancer. I'm going to be covering myths and evidence, some of the newer myths, both public and official. And I'm going to be going into about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, I found some interesting things about the Oswald timeline. So I'm going to be doing part of my speech on that, and just delving into showing the very small amount of time and how improbable the official timeline is as far as Oswald in those last 72 hours. And I'm eventually going to post that on the site once I get the speech, but they get to hear it first.
Hey, I got an idea. I can write the speech for you, and you could be done in like less than a minute. You want to hear it real quick?
Sure.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the NID Dallas Conference. My name is Carmine Savastano. I'll be talking about myths and legends, having to do with the Kennedy assassination. Well, wait a minute. Why should I even stand up here and tell you? Let's just take a little walk down the street to the other conference, and you can hear all about them for yourself. The end.
Nice. Well, yes, I'm sure that unfortunately at the other conference, the myths are going to be presented as truth. I like to call the other, I don't even call it a conference, it's the circus down the street.
Yeah, sorry, man. I had to take a little low blow right there, Just
Hey, with the amount of mythical material that the Judith Baker crowd and her conference pump out, I understand why people would not be happy about it.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of it. And, there's some credible names sprinkled in there. I don't know why, but...
I know. Yeah, I was disappointed to see that, unfortunately, some of the people who people consider credible are going to be speaking down there, but what are you going to do?
Well, maybe they'll see the light when they get there and figure out that they're at the sideshow carnival and not at the main circus tent. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, nice. Well, people, too, have been telling me, they've been warning me, they're like, some people aren't going to like, oh, well, people don't like what I have to say now already. Sometimes.
Yeah. But
most people seem to like what I have to say, but yeah, there's going to be people who are committed to a story that they don't have evidence for, and what can I tell you? You got to get over it. If the truth is the truth, it's the truth even when we don't like it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know what to do, but, emphasize that this is what the documents tell us. This is our evidence, and without anything else, it's just a story,
Exactly.
And if you want to put your faith in a story, you go right ahead, but...
Good luck to you.
Stuff needs to be verifiable, and I think most of the people there, are good guys like Larry Hancock, Stu Wexler, and these guys know the importance of primary documents. So I don't think you'll have a problem.
No, I think I'll be okay. The knives will come out in the private meetings later, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, Carmine, it's been a pleasure as always, my friend, and hopefully we'll get you back on here a little sooner than we did this time. I've been on hiatus for like 2 months, so.
Yeah, you got a lot going on, I understand. Hopefully, I'll get back in here and we'll cover at least one other topic before the speech.
Oh, definitely. And I want to definitely have you back on after you go to November, so we can hear all the horror stories. All the war tales and horror stories, because I know, I'd never been to a conference before, and my perception was totally different than the reality, and we had a lot of fun. Trust me, a lot of good stories, and it's an experience, and you're gonna dig it. And I want to hear all about it when you get back. But yeah, we'll definitely talk before then. And dude, thank you so much for coming on.
I really appreciate you having me, man. It's always a pleasure.
No problem. You hang on for me. Everybody, head over to tlgpodcast.com for pictures of the identification. I'm going to post links to all the documents that we talked about here today that Carmine has supplied for us, and you can see them with your own 2 eyes and make your own conclusions. That's it for this week, people. This sumbitch is in the can, beamed up the satellite down directly to your ears, people. This is your boy. Back. Peace.